Today's story begins with Java. I mean, it's not this Java of the software, nor this Java in Tatooine, but this Java island in Indonesia. There was a kind of matchlock gun. The Java arquebus. Its trigger system has a very clear spring, and according to this feature, it is natural that we can remind the famous matchlock massacre in East Asia. The Japanese Hinamaju, in spite of this Java arquebus, looks colder than the Japanese matchlock gun, and both had different features of the trigger. However, we can still infer that both had the same fire logic. The spring gives the summertime holder power, and it takes the burning wick to touch the gunpowder, then fire it. So while the types of Java Island and Japan were similar, although their gunships were not the same, it does not hinder our mind from thinking of the association of Java arquebus with the Japanese arquebus. Actually, the result is reasonable. At this time, if you are familiar with the history of the 16th century in East Asia and Southeast Asia, I believe that you have known the answer. There was a group of people who had become the key to massacre the technology of both places, although the way is very long distances. These people are Portuguese. The 16th century is a great time of Imperial Portuguese. After conquering Brazil in the early 16th century, their footsteps arrived in India and maritime Southeast Asia, so it started a new chapter of the communication and the trade between the people of maritime Southeast Asia and Portugal. And also, there were many bloody scenes that appeared in this land. From that time, the European goods also came into this side of the earth after many fighting between the Portuguese and the local people, such as the War of Capture of Malacca in 1511. Meanwhile, because of the war, local people needed to get or build those firearms, and plus, the mechanism of firearms at that time was simple. So, how to make the firearms was not a secret anymore. After some battles, most people could get a gun from their enemy on the battlefield and bring to their smart craftsmen. After a while, they just could reproduce it. Finally, they could reproduce the fire weapon.
Espingarda.
This name was coined by the Portuguese language, espingarda. When the people of Malacca sought it, fighting with the Portuguese, the arquebus maker was Japanese. And meanwhile, Japanese also manufactured their own cannon. From some photos in museum, we can see that there are some old cannons reproduced from that time. If you are a history researcher of Chinese Ming Dynasty, I will believe that you have found that it's a breech-loading civil gun. Its Chinese name is 佛朗机炮. And on the side of Japan, in 1543, several Portuguese boarded a ship, whose owner was the famous Chinese pirate in history, Wang Zhi. Some ancient book recorded the name is Wang Zhi. Then the Portuguese came to the island of Japan, Tanegashima. Finally, the Portuguese firearms also came to Japan. So this might be the reason why the Java arquebus and the Japanese arquebus had a similar fire mechanism. In fact, when we see the Malay matchlock massacre, probably we can see the shadow of the Japanese arquebus. The Vietnamese ancient firearms history perhaps could be divided into two parts. The first part is the Chinese Ming Dynasty type era. During this time, many hand cannons that were used by the Vietnam soldiers were presumed to be those hand cannons imported from the Ming Dynasty possibly. Then, the second part is into the 16th century. In Vietnam, it's the
Nhà Hậu Lê.
Dynasty era. Just like the Java arquebus burning story, the Vietnamese new type firearms were about the Portuguese matchlock. In 1516, Portuguese traders sailing from Malacca landed in
Đà Nẵng
and established a presence there. Then Western weapons were purchased by lords to increase their armies, and muskets began to be imported into Daiyue ever since, especially the Cochin China area, the first HQ of Portuguese in Vietnam at that time. Plus, this name made was borrowed from the Japanese or the Chinese language sword at that time of Jiaozhi, which is another name of Vietnam in China and Japan areas. And in order to distinguish the area from the city and the princely state of Cochin in India, which was their first headquarters in the Malabar coast, they added the word China, China, in the name. The Portuguese traveler Tomé Piles, in his Suma Oriental, mentioned that Cochin China has countless musketeers and small bombers. Piles also mentioned that very much gunpowder is used in war and for amusement. After some of border conflict with ethnic minority groups in Guangxi and Yunnan of Ming Dynasty, perhaps this new type of Vietnamese matchlock musket was introduced to the Great Ming. Then, this kind of musket was called 胶纸枪 or 胶枪 for short. When this is word recorded in some ancient books in China, just like Li Tiaoyuan mentioned 胶枪 and the Java archipels in his 南越笔记, and Liu Xianting wrote that 胶枪 is the best in the world in his book 广阳杂记. But I have the doubt point is that the 胶枪 of Qing dynasty after the 18th century or even 19th century was likely not totally a relative proper norm used for the Vietnamese type musket. The Chinese 胶枪 of the 18th century looks different from the 胶枪 of the original type. Perhaps this is because this kind of Vietnamese matchlock musket was always developing or was remodeled after 200 or 300 years of this kind of gun introduced into the Great Ming. And in the hundreds years, China experienced many chaos and wars, and the dynasty transformed from the Ming to the Qing. In addition, one of the unique features of Vietnamese matchlock musket is the dust cover. When I saw this thing, I was reminded of the cover of a Japanese Type 38 in World War II, including the Java archipels. Maybe this is the kind of cover as well. Then, it is worth mentioning that Emperor Kangxi also mentioned a kind of cover which was the relative accessory of the musket, but this was a matchlock gun captured in the Battle of Chao Mo Duo. So I believe it's a new research point for Chinese and Southeast Asian matchlock firearms. Back to Vietnam, just like China, there are many different ethnic groups in Vietnam. And then, the firearms tag didn't stop the development steps and had many variants. So finally, many different types appeared. But overall, the style of Southeast Asian musket and the East Asian musket both still had similar points, although the arms makers were not from the same country or the same ethnic group. Finally, because the Southeast Asian history is not a familiar part for me, this land not only has many countries, but also has many different languages, so it's a little complex as well. And that's the reason why I named this video The First Meet. So if the firearms are part of history, and meanwhile, also is a long history river that makes those cruel fighting implements washed off their ancient bloody smudge into a kind of cultural symbol, just like the Japanese katana, the English longbow, etc. Okay, this is today's video. Hope you can like this video. Have a good day. See you next time.